Hello everyone, welcome back to Morgan's Movie Collection. Today I have a pile of 10 Blu-rays next to me that I have bought in the last few years simply because we have covered these movies on Morgan Hasn't Seen. Morgan Hasn't Seen is of course one of our weekly shows on the It's a Wonderful podcast feed. Find it on all major podcast platforms. There are links all over the place on this channel to go and check that out. Of course, subscribe and ding your notification bell on this channel before we get started today. But let's get started now, because they're an interesting bunch that I have next to me today, to be honest, because, well, there's plenty of movies on Morgan Hasn't Seen that I would say I prefer to some of these next to me. But you've got to find that balance between the movies that I have loved talking about and discovering on that show, and the ones that have a really good Blu-ray release as well. You know, that's equally as important, if not kind of more so, for me as a collector. I would love so many more movies to house here in my collection of ones we have covered on Morgan Hasn't Seen. Like I say, many of which I think I would call favourites ahead of some of these movies, and that's not to say, by the way, that there are not some real standout favourite movies from the history of Morgan Hasn't Seen in this bunch today. We have just recently celebrated 250 episodes of Morgan Hasn't Seen with a special video show that you can find on this channel as well. So go and check that out if you haven't already. But we will start with Second Sight's release of 1978's Magic with Anthony Hopkins. If you want a creepy, meek, mild-mannered but deeply disturbed Anthony Hopkins, then you are not getting much better than Magic, a terrifying ventriloquist doll that takes over the mind of a young Anthony Hopkins in this one. Not only is it a wonderful release, but it is a great, great movie. A terrifying movie, a real chiller, really tense, really psychological, very, very nasty when you actually take some time to think about the mental state of Anthony Hopkins in this movie. We covered it on a Decades of Horror series, I believe, which we've done a couple of. This was our choice for the 70s, or should I say it was Janine's choice, of course, for the 70s, as she always curates the Morgan Hasn't Seen series very, very particularly. Magic from 1978. It is wonderful. Next up, we have another one. I think this might have actually been the episode directly after Magic, because we definitely did this on a Decades of Horror series as well. This is 1980's Prom Night, which isn't my favourite slasher ever, but 101 Films, who release this Blu-ray, always do a great job with weirder movies like this, cult movies, horror movies, and I do enjoy Prom Night. I think it's a very interesting slasher movie, certainly a fundamental slasher movie from the real height of that genre's popularity. But, you know, I don't find myself rewatching it all the time at all. It's a good movie, though, if you're ever in the mood for a good, interesting, slightly out there slasher. Prom Night is a great way to go, and this is a fantastic release. Again, I mean, all these are fantastic releases. I won't need to say that anymore, but 1980's Prom Night is there too. Next, we have what we covered on a holiday horror series in December, was a slasher movie that, you know, we've just had Prom Night that I said maybe isn't my favourite slasher movie ever. Silent Night, Deadly Night might be one of my favourite slashers ever. I think this is a really underappreciated slasher movie. Certainly one of the best Christmas horror movies I think you could possibly wish for. 101 again have this wonderful Blu-ray of it. They also do Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, which I haven't seen, I don't own, and is apparently absolutely atrocious. But I think we said that as much on the episode, if I remember rightly. It was quite a while ago that we did cover this movie on Morgan Hasn't Seen. But it's great because it's psychological as well. I think you really get into the mind of your killer here, who is deeply disturbed by a Santa in his youth, dresses up as Santa in later life, and kind of just, goes on a bit of a rampage. It's a slasher movie, there's nothing too deep here, but I think it's a really, really underappreciated one. I love Silent Night, Deadly Night. Yes, very much so. Next up, we have a movie. Well, this is actually a Blu-ray with the movie we covered and its sequel, which came out quite a long time after, I think a couple of decades after, because this is BFI's release of Tales from the Hood 1 and 2, but we're here to talk about Tales from the Hood, the first one, which we covered on I think it was just a general black movies series, and this was one of our horror selections. It was perhaps actually just a horror series. I kind of forget, because we have done quite a few black horror movies, and certainly a lot of black movies on Morgan Hasn't Seen. An area of movies that have perhaps been my favourite to get into, and several of which we have in this pile. But Tales from the Hood is definitely one of the best anthology horror movies you could wish for, let alone one of the best black horror movies, or black anthology horror movies. Because while the anthology format often has its stories in there that, there's always usually one highlight story, and the rest, are lesser ones. I don't think that's the case with Tales from the Hood, and it has a very, very great kind of centerpiece as well, with those guys going to the house and them all having their coffins laid out there, and them ending up being sent to hell at the end of the movie after hearing all these stories. And we talk an awful lot in this movie, particularly about the very nasty turn that David Alan Grier gives as an abusive father, quite a way away from his far more comedic, normal surroundings that we're used to seeing him in. It is a wonderful anthology movie, Tales from the Hood. Another black movie, and one from Criterion. I think the only Criterion release we have in this pile, actually, is one of the best modern romance movies. One of definitely my favourite modern romance movies, Love and Basketball, which is it's a beautiful Criterion release with Sanaa Lathan and Omar Epps. Gina Prince Blythewood, of course, but thematically, this movie is so powerful, so emotional, so deeply romantic. Weirdly, we covered this, I think, on a Black Rom-Coms series. I wouldn't necessarily call it a rom-com. It's a romantic drama, romantic sports drama, but the way the basketball weaves itself into the love story between these two, and it beginning and ending fundamentally in the same place, with them playing, basketball in the street with each other after going on very different careers within the sport and very different lives within the sport, growing apart at times, but coming back together just because that's where your soul takes you. I think it is a stunning movie, a massively emotional movie, and definitely one of my favourites we've ever covered on Morgan Hasn't Seen. So I had to get the best version possible, which is why I think it's the only modern movie in my Criterion collection. Love and Basketball from 2000. It is great. Next up, we have Fright Night. Eureka Classics version of Fright Night. Weird 80s vampire movie. What isn't to love there? I think we covered this on a general horror series on the show as well. But it's a great movie. It's so much fun. It's so perfectly 80s. Is it Chris Sarandon who plays the vampire in the movie? Yes. And Roddy McDowall in that kind of wonderful homage to Peter Cushing in this movie. It's great. But the effects, the vampire effects on Chris Sarandon, I'm picturing it now, are great in this movie. Wonderful vampire movie. Definitely one I loved from the show. And yes, Eureka, why not get this version of it? It's great. Next up, we have an interesting one, because this technically isn't, or it technically doesn't fall into the same category as the rest of today's movies, because this Eureka Classics, again, collection of Blackula and Scream, Blackula Scream, its sequel from 73 and 74, I think, is when Blackula came out, and the sequel in 74. But these were movies that I owned before we covered them on Morgan Hasn't Seen. But when we had covered them, or covered Blackula at least, loved it so much that I improved my version of it to this edition, rather than the DVD version that I did have. So technically it counts. Technically I bought this specific Blu-ray because we covered this movie on Morgan Hasn't Seen. And Blackula is definitely one of my favourite movies we've ever covered on the show. It is... What can I say about Blackula that I haven't already said on many, many shows about Blackula? It somehow comes up randomly sometimes on some of our shows, because it just took us both by surprise how wonderfully sincere it is as a vampire movie. And how, you know, while being a blaxploitation movie, it does not ever, I think, come across as cheesy or over the top as an awful lot of blaxploitation movies perhaps can. It is a sincere vampire movie with really more, you know, more similarities to Boris Karloff's The Mummy than anything else. It's great. It's so good. Go and watch Blackula. Do not be put off by its admittedly silly title. Go and watch it. It's far better than that. Next up, we have what might perhaps still be my favourite ever Morgan Hasn't Seen movie. And I know that's a bold statement, and I know I've said it quite a bit. But Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs, this is Arrow's release of The People Under the Stairs, I've always thought of as one of my favourite Morgan Hasn't Seen movies. I mean, this release, again, is just great. It's ram-packed with features, much like all of these releases are. That's why I get these specific Blu-rays from these specific labels, to get the most out of your movie-watching experience. The People Under the Stairs is, again, an under-talked about Wes Craven movie. Just an incredible dark fairy tale, going into this house, having to weave your way through the walls with Roach here on the front cover. Tongueless Roach to save the young girl in there, and all the creepy people under the stairs, seeming to be the villains, but actually end up helping you in the end. And it is the matriarch and the patriarch of the household we are within here, who act very much like fairy tale villains, like the old woman from Hansel and Gretel almost, but in arguably a more violent way. It's a great movie. Again, it has its roots in black movies as well. I've always said it's a fantastic comparison, or a fantastic double feature, with Candyman, as far as early 90s black horror movies go. because it has this whole commentary on gentrification and judgment of black neighbourhoods and things like that. It's wonderful. It's saying more than it might, or than you might think it does, all the while being a great dark fairy tale, and I love that aspect about it so much. People Under the Stairs from 1991. Again, from Arrow, we have 1989's Heathers. We covered it in a dark teen movies series, and it's a very, very dark teen movie. It's exactly the kind of dark teen movie I absolutely love. I remember very, very much enjoying Heathers, and love that it's in my collection, because it's not typically the kind of movie I would add to my collection in more recent years. But it is just nasty at times, but so much fun and so captivating. I mean, Christian Slater is great in Heathers. It is really a teen movie not for the faint of heart, which is a great idea for a teen movie anyway, when they can go to this dark an area, to this darker level. I think, why not? It's wonderful. Heathers, 1989. And perhaps lastly, we have, well, it's another black movie. We did cover this on a black movies series. I think this was with an action double feature. This is very much a blaxploitation movie. This is Pam Grier in Coffee, I think again from 1973. But honestly, this is one of the best blaxploitation movies out there. Pam Grier is the definitive woman of that era in these kind of movies, and she excels in Coffee. I mean, it is such a wild movie. Again, a movie that deals with really nasty things going on, but effortlessly cool, even while being hyper-violent and really dark, really twisted at times. But you love watching Pam Grier in this movie go around beating the hell out of these people that really, really deserve it on her revenge mission. It's wonderful. Coffee. Definitely a great place to start with blaxploitation as well, if you're looking to get into that genre. But there we go for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope I've given you some nice recommendations there, and definitely go and check out Morgan Hasn't Seen if you don't listen to the show already. Like I said before, on the It's a Wonderful podcast feed every single Wednesday. There are links all over the place on this channel to go and check that out. But I'll be back pretty soon, and until next time, goodbye.